Welcome to Beyond the Bugles, where the firehouse table meets real leadership, real stories, and provides real growth in the fire service. I'm your host, Assistant Chief Jacob Johnson with the Pearland Fire Department. And this is the podcast built for firefighters who want more purpose, culture, and accountability, and more pride in this job. Here, we go beyond tactics and titles. We talk mindset, we talk leadership, we talk firehouse culture, kitchen table conversations, and what it truly takes to build trust, get the buy-in, and build elite teams. From cutting-edge operations to the fuel of motivation and integrity, each episode features the chiefs and leaders you know, and the ones you absolutely need to know, sharing hard-earned lessons, honest insight, and stories from the front lines. So pull up a chair, grab your favorite cup of coffee, and get ready for conversations that reignite your passion and challenge you to be better than you were yesterday. This is Beyond the Bugles. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Beyond the Bugles, a leadership podcast hosted by me, Jacob Johnson, Assistant Chief of the Pearland Fire Department, in cooperation with Firehouse Magazine and Endeavor Business Group. So this is episode number 2, episode 2 for the week, for the month, I'm sorry. This is something that's brand new, as we announced last month on Mentor Monday, and I have a real great lineup of guests this year, starting with last week with Doug Boker, and then again this week, another home run with my good buddy, Chief Dennis Reilly. So right off the rip, we have Dennis Reilly here. Chief, I really appreciate you being here today. I appreciate you joining us on this podcast, and I'm glad that we're able to connect and come together and talk leadership.
Awesome, man. I just appreciate you having me on. I always look forward to having good, healthy conversations about leadership in the fire service and trying to drop some nuggets that are going to help everybody out there kind of move down the road toward excellence. So thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. It's my honor. You know, you and I go way back. We've been at several conferences together. We seem to always have good conversation. And the thing that I love is, you know, you've been on the job a lot longer than I have, and you and I still to this day seem to have a lot of the same views, which I think is important because it means that the generation gap there that everybody complains about isn't totally necessarily true, and it's something that that the older generations and the newer generations and those in between can really come together and keep our job alive and keep it alive in the right way. So I appreciate you and all that you've brought to me. But if you would, Chief, go ahead and kick us off and just tell us your biography. Tell us all about you. I'm sure there's people out there that already know it, but I'm sure there's a bunch more that don't. And I want them to get to know you.
Sure, absolutely. Well, and I think that what you just talked about. Excellence is excellence. Excellence was excellence in the 1960s, and it's excellence today. And there's some common threads that have stood the test of time that we can get into, but I think that's very important for everybody to understand and realize that the older generation knows it, and the older generation needs to be able to communicate it to the newer generation in a way that they're going to be able to absorb it and use it. So that's my little soapbox, for the old guys and for the young guys. As far as I go, I left. I started hanging out in firehouses when I was 16 on Long Island. I turned 17. I went in the Army, spent 6 years in the Army. And then through the time I was in the Army, I was also volunteering. So I got out, went to work for a county fire department, kind of bounced around a little bit. And the first big move I made was up to Cherry Hill, New Jersey. I got hired as a captain in the training division. I was the first one to be promoted to battalion chief off a competitive exam. Spent about 19 years up there, 10 of them as a shift commander. Retired. I actually went to work for Blackwater Security, spent a couple years in Iraq and Afghanistan. Came home. And really, at some point, my wife said, you need to kind of grow up and realize that, you're a little bit old to be running around out there. And, she was right. So I went to Sunrise Beach, Missouri as the fire chief for right at 8 years. Spent a little time out in California as an ops chief. Left California and went to Pittsburgh, Kansas as the fire chief. Retired off of active duty about 3 years ago. And I'm living down here on the Panhandle in Florida, about 10 minutes off the beach, running the first line fire service training.
Wow, that's awesome. And I think that's something, I think I've only heard about your career from Sunrise over to California to Kansas. So to hear the New Jersey part is something that's awesome, and which is going to go great with today and go great with this podcast is talking about leadership at the chief level. And you've had a lot of experience from the sounds of it from there. And so, to start it off, I do want to ask one question. I think it's one question that I'm going to keep on the podcast for each of my guests because I think it's important, Chief. And I think one of them is um, from the rank of battalion chief and up, we have a very important job, and that is obtaining trust. Outside of everything else, we have to obtain trust of the men and women who report to us and the men and women that we work for. And so, in your eyes, what is one attribute, right, that you can bring that will have the men and women lose trust in you as a chief officer faster than what most people realize?
Oh, there's a long laundry list of things that we can talk about, but I think when you lose integrity, uh, when you say one thing and do something else, do the opposite, that just kills your credibility with the staff. I've always been, I've always been a real big advocate on setting expectations and holding people accountable. So if I'm going to talk about that, then I have to do it. I have to set those expectations. I have to sit down with people and make it clear what I expect of them. I have to kind of define what good behavior looks like. And then I've got to have the moral courage to back that up. So at some point, some people are going to stray a little bit. And it's really easy to, there's a saying that goes along the lines of always choose the difficult right over the easy wrong. So when people start straying, you go, is it really a big deal? I got a lot going on. I'm not in a good mood. I got this project I'm working on, and I see this person starting to drift. And it's like, I'll get to it. And before you know it, 2 weeks down the road, you don't get to it, you forget about it. But the important thing for leaders to remember is everybody knows, everybody sees it, and everybody is looking to see what you're going to do as the leader. So if you set expectations and you make this, and you make a big point about holding people accountable, you've got to do that. And when you choose not to do that, that's when you lose your integrity and your credibility. And I think that is an absolute formula to wreck your ability to be a positive force and lead.
Wow, I love it because I completely agree with you. I think that if you want to gain trust, you have to show integrity, and then if you lose trust, it's because you show lack of integrity. And I really think that that is absolutely the foundation to being a good company officer, to being a good chief, to being a good fire chief, in my opinion. And so I really love that. But I want to hit on something that you brought up there because I have it time stamped. Is you said choose the difficult right over the easy one, and so when it comes down to that decision, when it comes down to having to make that call, what are some things that we should consider, or what are some things that we should think about, and when it comes to making the hard choice? Because sometimes those hard choices have very hard consequences, and we're all people. And so sometimes it's hard to swallow or even accept the hard consequences that are going to come with that decision. So, what is some advice out there that you would have for everyone on how to make that decision and become comfortable with it?
Well, I think one of the things that you have to do when it comes to making that decision is have you made your, and I go back to expectations because expectations really is, the footing that you stand on. Have you made your expectations clear? Do the people know that, do they know what's expected of them so that when you talk to them, you can say, hey, listen, on day one, we sat down and we laid out these expectations. And I think the next thing you have to look at, and and it's difficult because we're all human beings and we all have emotions and feelings. Are you talking about the behavior or are you talking about the person? If you set expectations, you can talk about the behavior. So it's not you're a bad person, you are not meeting the expectations that we have set. So it's hard to sit there and look somebody in the eye and say, you're a really bad person because you didn't. Well, it's not they're a bad person. It's just that they did not meet the expectations. So I think you have to keep that in the back of your mind. And the other thing to think about is if these people have put themselves in a position where you have to speak to them, it's because of their actions. Excuse me, it's not because you've set expectations and they acted in a way contrary to the expectations you set. And as a boss, you have a right to set expectations. I've always told people that if it's not illegal, immoral, unsafe, or a gross violation of policy and procedure, you have a right to tell people what to do because you're the boss. So when all these things happen, you have to say to yourself, it's not me targeting them, it's what they did that put themselves in this position. Another thing that you have to think about, just like I said, everybody knows and everybody's watching. So if you don't correct this, what's the next step? And then what's the next step after that? And what's the next step after that? And at some point in time, you'll totally lose your ability to guide, direct, and influence. So I think you have to look at all those factors and say, well, I've got to do the hard right. It's not going to be fun. I've fired people, I've demoted people, I've had some very serious personnel issues that I've had to deal with. And I take no joy in it. I mean, I'm not bragging about the fact that I've fired and demoted people. And quite honestly, every time I had to do that, I lost a lot of sleep over it because you're right. You could very well end up taking action that takes somebody's livelihood away from them. But if they're not meeting the expectations, and you have to think, I think you have to think about it this way. If they're not meeting the expectations, what are they going to do on the fire ground? I mean, if they're the poor performer here, if you laid out your expectations and they still don't do it, that's what they're doing in the firehouse. But what they do in the firehouse will go to the fire ground. You're not a substandard performer 98% of the time. But then when you have that working fire with somebody trapped, you don't run in a phone booth and come out with an S on your chest. What you do in the firehouse is what you do on the fire ground. So you have to say to yourself, am I going to overlook this and eventually have something go wrong on the fire ground to cost somebody their life? What are you going to think about then? How are you going to feel then? Because you didn't have the moral courage to have the difficult conversation when it was time to have the difficult conversation.
I love that, Chief. I love everything about that right there. I'm time stamping it. Just, I mean, the whole answer in itself is amazing, but the fact that you said right there, do you have the moral courage? I mean, that ties everything up into everything that you just described. It ties it up into one question. Do you have the moral courage? Because you're right. I mean, I've always had a difficult time having to go to these termination meetings, right? And like my dad, I would always go to my dad because he was a boss and he was at a high level in his job. And what he always told me is, Jacob, people fire themselves. You just have to do your job to hold them accountable, or you're going to be sitting on the wrong side of the table, right? And when I think about that, it's very true. But my dad also followed that up, and he goes, and if you go home at night and you lose sleep over the fact that you just sat on the other side of the table that day, that's when you know that, one, you did the right thing, but two, you truly care because it's a human being that you're affecting.
Right.
And so I think that that's something that takes that moral courage, is to sit on that side of the table and know what you're doing, but also know this, is that if we focus so much on the 1 or 2% that are not meeting expectations in our fire department, we're going to let down the 98, 99% of the ones who are.
Yeah.
But when you talk about expectations, there's a lot of talk out there, and I want to get your opinion on it because I know that you've seen it in multiple different states, multiple different departments, and I know that you're still very active within the job today. What is your opinion on expectations? Should they just be written down and signed, sealed, delivered, and say, this is it, this is the job? Or should they be written down and then you as the leader show the expectation to the crew? Or should they just be a verbal meeting sitting at the kitchen table or sitting outside at the cigar table, and then as a company officer showing them and showing the expectation and how to meet them? What is your opinion on that?
So all I can do is tell you how I managed that. And over the course of time, it proved to be fairly successful. Uh, I think you have to keep expectations short. I think you have to focus on things like behaviors and attitudes. They already have a job description. I think when you get down into the weeds, subconsciously, what you're telling people is you're too stupid to figure out what your job description is. So I'm going to you don't get anywhere like that. So I like to focus on behaviors. I like to focus on attitudes. I have an expectations memo for every rank that I ever supervised. And what I would do is I had a new officer come to my command first day, drive out to the firehouse, drop it off, say, listen, these are my expectations. I want you to take the day, read through this. I'm going to come back after dinner, and you and I are going to go somewhere, sit down, just have a conversation so I can answer any of your questions. But I always let them have it in writing. I didn't make them sign for it, I just gave it to them. Everybody knew that I did that. So nobody's really going to be able to say, well, I never signed for it. It's like, nah, everybody knew what it was.
Hmm.
And that's the way I handled it. And I always frame the conversation in a way that, listen, this is about putting you in a position to be successful. This isn't that little tool that I'm going to use to come out here and whack you when you step out of line. If you're going to be successful, then you need to know what's expected of you. And that's why I'm giving you this in writing. And that's why I'll sit here all night long and answer any question that you have based on the expectations. But I think that's the best way to go because really you're letting people know, you're putting them in a position to be successful. You're letting them know what good behavior looks like. And then they have it that they can refer back to. So that's the way that I manage expectations. And I will say this, everybody's always got a boss. So when you craft your expectations memo, take it to your boss and say, hey, listen, boss, can we die on this hill? I want you to look at this thing. Are we comfortable with this? Are you comfortable with me giving this to my subordinates? Because if you say yes and they stray, I'm going to take action. And I want you to know all the moving pieces and parts before you have to deal with it in a crisis situation. And I've seen guys, they tell, well, I want you here an hour before shift change. Well, that's great, no problem. You're going to pay me overtime, right?
Yeah.
If you give them that in writing, you've given them an order. Now, if you build the culture where they want to be there an hour ahead of time, that's a whole different story. And I think when you focus on attitudes and behaviors and things like that, you're building that positive culture in your firehouse, in your battalion, in your division that's going to, position those high performers to be there early. But you can't order them, and that's why I always say to subordinate officers, let your boss see the memo just to make sure you're comfortable with what you're going to tell your people.
God, I love it, Chief. And look, I mean, I sure hope people out there are going to enjoy this because we're 20 minutes into this, and I have way too many nuggets already timestamped because you really are speaking the truth and you're speaking what a chief officer should be. And when you look at it like this, you say everyone has a boss, and I think that's a great example because I think that there's a misconception that when you get up to the rank of assistant chief, fire chief, or even when you get to the rank of that's assigned to administration, that you have the easy life and that there is no true expectations on you. But I'll tell you, and I'm sure you did the same when you were the chief. I have expectations for my fire chief, and I had a memo, and we would have talks, and if I wasn't meeting them, we would sit across from each other, and he would explain to me where I needed to step it up, and I know for a fact that he has expectations from the city manager. And so, I think that the all of that starts when you're a probie and continues throughout your career that you always have to answer to somebody. Um, and I want to touch on something you talked about, the culture of coming in early. I think, like you said, it's a way um, of how you put it to the crews. On the fire service, we call it a gentleman's handshake. Like, You come in early for me so I can go see my family, and then I'm going to come in early for the next guy. The next guy's going to come in early for you, and you do your pass down, and then right there at the bell, let's say you change at 0600, everything is completed. Your gear is swapped out, your pass down's done, and you're able to go home to your family. But on the flip side, if you are the guy that's going to push the bell to, 558, 559 coming in for a 0600 shift change, that's on the senior firefighters to handle that. And you shouldn't have to get involved as a chief officer. Definitely shouldn't have to, or as a company officer, and you definitely shouldn't have to get involved as a chief officer. You need to allow the guys to handle the guys, right? Um, but I did want to hit on that because I do think it's how we portray it, and that it's not so much I need you to come in early. It's scratching the back of the next guy and the next guy and the next guy because they're going to come and scratch yours. So
Yeah, because one of these days you're going to need it.
right,
You know, if you're not stepping up, don't expect other people to step up for you. And I think you've just raised a point that I often talk about. When you have a new person come to your command, I'm an army guy, I use those terms, whatever, they come to your firehouse, they come to you, whatever. Ask them two questions. Have you ever played team sports, or have you ever been in the military? And if they say no to both of those questions, they probably don't have a good working understanding of the team centered environment. Me coming in early so that you can get out on time is understanding that we're all on a team. We're all, I'm depending on you. People come to the fire service 22, 23 years old. They've worked in Walmart for 2 years. They were on the chess team for like 6 months in high school, and they come into the fire service. We stick them out in the firehouse. They have no understanding of how the team centered environment really works. They flounder in the environment, and then we blame them. Oh, look at this, look at him, look at her. They don't get it. They don't understand. Well, it's because it's not within their frame of reference. It's not their fault. They've never been in a team centered environment. And quite honestly, sometimes their failures are really our failures because we didn't sit down and take the time to explain how this place really works. We just assume, well, they went to the academy, they know. No, no, they don't. The first time they were ever introduced into this environment was when they went into the academy. And quite honestly, they didn't figure anything out. They just figured out how to survive, how to come out on the other side with their certificate, where their education, the deep chapters, not the real chapters, but the deep chapters of their education start when they come to the firehouse. And what they don't know, we have a responsibility to teach them, not for them to sit there and just try to figure everything out on their own.
right. Yeah, you see, and I love that, Chief. I love how you're able to relate, and it's what we started this podcast on. How the words that you're saying are words that you were taught when you were a probie on the job, but they still relate to today's job. They still relate to the chief officers of today. And so when I think about that, when I think about how you're still able to relate, what is one piece of advice that you know now or that you wish you had back then when you were first becoming a chief? Because I think more than ever, I think you and I can agree that men and women on this job are promoting faster than has ever happened in the history of our service. More volunteer fire departments are transitioning to career. More combination fire departments are transitioning to all career, and people are being placed in leadership positions that, in all honesty, they may not be ready for. But they listen to podcasts like this, they read books, they go to conferences, they read articles in order to try to help prepare themselves. So, what's one thing that you think that you could give to a brand new chief officer that you wish you would have known your first year?
Well, I'll say this in this, as part of this conversation, I promoted too early. I mean, I was in an organization, we were in a position where things had to move up pretty quick, and I promoted too early. I wish I had spent more time, and part of that was my own ambition. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I wish that I had spent more time as a firefighter. I wish I had spent more time as a company officer. With that being said, I made some serious mistakes as a new chief until I finally realized that I didn't know everything. Nobody knows everything. Okay, you can have you just don't know everything. Just, you can have certificates, you can have a 6-inch ring binder full of certificates, but you still don't have the practical experience. That's the other side of that equation. There's formal training and there's practical experience. I think you have to have a mix of both, but a lot of newer chiefs don't have enough on the practical experience side. So take your foot off of the gas, understand that you have two eyes and two ears, understand that there's a lot of smart people out there in the firehouses that can help you. And you've been promoted. You don't need to beat anybody over the fact, over the head with the fact that you're the boss. You are the boss. So sometimes it's okay just to be really quiet and take a step back and watch and learn from the people who are in the subordinate ranks that have that practical experience that you don't have.
Yep, completely agree with you. And I love that you brought up you don't have to know everything, because I think that that's an important piece of advice that any new officer feels, and especially chief officers, they feel that they have to know everything. And I think that's why they get in trouble so fast. And I think that it's honestly the only reason that most people feel they have to know everything is due, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, but I think it's due to the lack of confidence they have in themselves for the rank that they hold within the job.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. There is something to be said about being, the chief. Everybody's looking at you, so and like you said, everybody's got a boss. So your subordinates are looking at you, and you've got to perform. But in the back of your mind, the headquarters is looking at you, and when you
Hmm.
step a little bit left or right, you're going to have to answer. And you have a thing that I think people really need to realize is that when they do something, the boss is always going to have to answer. I mean, I had firefighters do some really dumb things, and the chief calls me in. Why did so and so do whatever? What am I supposed to say? I don't know. Go talk to him.
Right.
The first time I say that is when I go back to the rank of captain. I have to take responsibility for that. I've got to go figure out what happened. I got to go figure out, Chief Viscuso has this thing. He talks about the unknowing, the unable, or the unwilling. So I got to go back to this firefighter and figure out where they are. And then I got to, work with their officer to identify these issues. So all these things happen when you're a new chief. And there's a lot of pressure on you to have all the answers, but you don't. You
Hmm.
just absolutely don't. So you have to take your foot off of the gas sometimes. You have to take advantage of all the resources that are available to you, which is basically the company officers and firefighters who are working for you. I mean, it's a balance. It really is. I mean, it takes, I will say that it took me probably about 4.5 years to get to the point where I really started to feel comfortable in the role. I mean, I
Hmm.
felt that I was capable, but there's a difference between being capable and being really comfortable. And it just took it took that long. So for new chiefs, don't expect to feel comfortable your second tour out in the firehouse. Expect to be a little bit nervous and on edge. And that's okay. That's that growing process that we all go through to get to that point.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you brought up something I want to hit on, but real quick, I think if you're not nervous, I mean, I get nervous every day I come to work. I get butterflies in my stomach, especially when I was a battalion chief, especially when I was a company officer. And I think if you don't have those butterflies, if you don't have those moments of nervousness, and don't mistaken it with uncertainty or lack of confidence, that's not it. It's butterflies of I have responsibility, butterflies of I have people's lives in my hands, butterflies of I need to make the right decisions today, or how can I push someone's career in a direction that they deserve and desire as a member of my shift or of my crew, or as right here as an assistant chief of my department. And so I think the butterflies are a good thing, and I think the nerves are a good thing as long as you know how to harness them and capitalize on them. But the one thing that you just brought up, you said that, everyone's in a fishbowl, give or take, right? Everyone can see us. As a chief, how do you, and I don't know the best way to put this, but how do you put your fire department on the map and you put your fire department in the face of others to make all of them look good, right? While also respecting the men and women on the streets and understanding that they're the heartbeat of the fire department and trying not to portray that it's all about you. How do you do that as a chief that is all encompassing and fair to everybody, but more importantly, really puts the men and women on the map, even though you may be the one getting the accolades?
Sure. So, one of the things that I, always say is, how can I help you be the best version of yourself? And when everybody's operating at that level, we're unstoppable. Really, when it comes right down to it. I mean, we have so much talent in firehouses. Uh, our organizations, your organization, my organization. We were multi-stations. We got a lot of people out there. We got a lot of knowledge. We got a lot of talent. So I've just always told everybody, how can I help you be the best version of yourself? Now, I'll certainly be willing to give you my feedback. I mean, I'll certainly be willing to share with you what I see from my perspective, but it's all about you being the best version of yourself. And when you're operating at that level, we all, a rising tide lifts all ships, So when you're operating that way, the person next to you is going to turn their game up a little bit because they don't want to be sick. We don't hire people in the fire service that are, content with being second best. I mean, we hire type A achievers. So if I can, motivate a few people, lead by example, kind of get you to start to raise your game a little bit, that person next to you is going to raise their game. So engine five sees what engine four is doing. Well, I mean, engine five doesn't want to be second best, so they're going to raise their game. And when we start doing this, when we just, I think when you focus on yourself, you focus on your unit and trying to make everybody as good as they can, everybody raises to the level. And that's what gets noticed. And I have a slide, where I talk about, we're all in and people can tell that by our actions, not our words. So we don't need to talk about it. I don't need to talk. And I truly think when I was the shift commander on the B platoon, the other two platoons couldn't touch us.
That's
You
right.
know?
Be shift
And
for life.
and I wasn't worried about the A's or C's because I just focused on the B's and what we could do. Everybody raised their game, and now that platoon had a solid reputation. That platoon had people wanting. We had more people that wanted to come to the B's than we had slots available. And
Same.
that's putting the B platoon on the map,
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion. And I think that's how we did it because it's never about me, it's about us and what I can do to put you in a position to be successful. And when we start, and you got to mean it,
Yeah.
it's you can talk that all day long, but if you don't mean it, they're going to see through you in 5 minutes. I mean, don't to
Absolutely.
new chiefs understand that some of the smartest people on the face of the earth are people out there in the firehouse. And if you're not genuine and sincere about what you say, they're going to see right through you. So, and I think that's the way you do it. I mean, that's the way it's worked for me.
Absolutely. And you, man, you hit the nail on the head with that one there. Is you have three shifts, and like you, I was a B shifter for golly for like 17 years, right? And long live the B shift. The B shift is the best. I'll always say that. But all three shifts can be meeting the expectations of the fire chief or of the assistant chief, and I think that's important. Is all three shifts, you and the other two chiefs, I'm sure, talked a lot about here are the expectations, here's how we're going to operate. But I do think that there's a difference in how you achieve those expectations and how passionate you are about those expectations. And that's where you start to see some of the separation between the shifts. And I think that it gets um, misdiagnosed or misinterpreted in a way of, oh, these guys are the problem children. No, they're just elevating themselves to a different level to meet the expectations of the fire chief or to meet the expectations of the assistant chief or whatever the case may be. Because we all know that there are levels to expectations, right? There's the bare minimum, then there's a little bit above that where you're at mediocre, and then you're at, elite. And the goal is to get all three shifts to elite, but I think that ultimately the goal is for all of you to be operating somewhat in the same direction so that way your fire department as a whole is successful. But I do appreciate the fact of you do have different shifts that just meet expectations at a different level, and that's where some of that misinterpretation comes from.
But for me, sometimes when that comes up in a conversation, I just ask people, well, do you want to go to the 8th platoon? I mean, if that's what you want to do, okay, I'll sign off on your papers. I mean, and if that's where you really want to go, then I'll help you get there. But when we go to a run, the A's and the C's are not on the rigs with us. Okay, we're the ones who are on the rigs, so let's focus on what we're doing right now. I mean, I have a saying, don't count the peas on someone else's plate. Whatever they do, that's what they do. If they've got a way that's going to make us better, then okay. What is it? Let's try it. Let's see if it works for us. If it does, that's great. We'll say thank you very much. But other than that, why are we paying attention to them? Why are
Right.
we paying attention? Because when we pay attention to them, we're diverting energy from ourselves and what we can do to make ourselves better. And I've just always felt like that, and I've had situations where day after day after day, the guys, the force wants to talk about the C platoon. Well, all right, enough. Here's
Right.
your 5 minutes. Now, what are we going to do for the next 23 hours and 55 minutes to make us better?
Yep. I love it. And I think that that's a good segue, Chief, into something that I think as chiefs we don't ever really want to talk about, and that's, and I don't want to use the term work-life balance, but I want to use the term of, as a chief officer, how do we portray the importance of family to all of those in our fire department? I know that I've talked with you enough that you and Miss Ann have a great marriage and a great relationship, and she is your rock. But at the same time, how as a chief, can we make sure that our rocks at home stay in place? And I think it's something that podcasts don't ever really want to touch is how do we take care of the home life because we're so hard and heavy on we got to talk about the job. But chief responsibility, I don't care if you're a shift commander or you're the fire chief, you have a ton on your plate. And whether you're on shift or not, your responsibilities are not shift based. They are 24/7, 365, because if the men and women don't need something, the fire department does. And so, how do you as a chief portray the importance of family and ensure that the men and women under you or your fire department as a whole understand the importance of taking care of what you have at home and making sure that at home knows that when you're home, they're the priority, regardless of what you have going on at work?
Well, I think, one of the important things is you have to say it. We assume, well, you have to say it. You have to, check in with your people and say, hey, how are things going? Hey, how are things at home? Hey, spend a little bit of time working on the home life because, you have a finite career, but your home life, your family was probably here before you came on, and it'll be here after you leave. So just saying that gives some credibility and some credence to that. And the other thing, and I talk about this in one of my lectures too, when we encourage families come to the firehouse for social events, or we have social events away from the firehouse, the bosses need to kind of talk to the spouses a little bit. Hey, how's so and so doing? Hey, how are things going? Because the spouses and families will tell you the truth.
Hmm.
They'll tell you if there's a problem. So sometimes I think you have to stay connected, not just to the firefighter, but you got to stay connected to the family because the family's depending on you to make sure that the job doesn't negatively impact on the family. Well, you got to check in with the families every once in a while. You got to make, every once in a while we had a really we had a very, very intense situation happen in an organization that I was part of. And I don't want to really kind of tip my hand on this because it was so emotionally intense. But I would call the spouses. Hey, how's so
Mhm.
and so doing? Hey, is everything going to be okay? We had to put some people off, on medical because of what they were dealing with. Check in on them. So I think all those things are things that chiefs need to understand and that chiefs need to do. And, once again, it adds a burden. So, y- I take care of everybody else, but I also want to say this to chiefs, you got to take care of yourself too. You got to know when, you're getting to that point, you got to be able to have some mechanism in place where you can detach and disengage for a bit. Don't, and Dennis was a lousy example for this, man. I saved all my vacation, man. I don't want to go on vacation. I'll miss the big fire. Well, when I retired, I had a ton of vacation time, and maybe I could have done an even better job if I had taken my vacations a little more often. So I think
Mhm.
those are all things that are absolutely important. And you touched on it. I mean, my wife and I, we've been together for over 40 years. We just renewed our vows this past June. And then within a month, I was diagnosed with cancer, you know. So who's there taking care of me? Who's there making all the phone calls and getting me scheduled for all these scans and all this other type of stuff? My wife, my wife's telling me, just go for a walk. I'll take care of it. And she's on the
Mhm.
phone. So, there's an example of how important it is to maintain that healthy relationship back on the home front.
Absolutely, because that's the type of family that we need to come home to. Because, like you just said, when you retire off the job, regardless, Chief, of how awesome you were or not, or how the men and women love you or don't, you're just a memory
Yeah,
whenever you walk out of the firehouse for the final time. And I don't care if you go back once a week and drink coffee, you're still just a memory. And
yeah.
what do you have at home, and you mentioned your cancer diagnosis, so I want to step off into that because I think as chief officers, above all else, especially when it comes to what we just talked about setting the example at home and setting the tone, we have to set the tone across our job. And whether that's through expectations or anything else that we've talked about today, from integrity to moral courage, we have to set the tone. And I think that that includes physical fitness and NFPA physicals and getting your yearly physicals and staying on top of your health. Now, some of us, like myself, are not the best examples of being physically fit or really truly diving into health. And it's stuff that me, myself, and others need to start taking better care of and start really honing in on and paying better attention. But with that, I've always admired the fact that even though you're retired, you're still doing workouts daily. You're still posting motivational workouts. You're posting motivational videos and you're keeping yourself active. So, as a chief, how important is it to set the tone, away from the job and just on the physical fitness side of it so we're prepared for the job, and then on the actual like NFPA physicals and medical physical side of it so we can get ahead of some of these diseases that are plaguing our job today?
So, there's a couple things, and I'll answer the question from my perspective and what I went through, with cancer. So I had stage 2 prostate cancer. I was totally asymptomatic. I had absolutely no symptoms, zero. And they caught it because I had my yearly blood work done and my PSA was slightly elevated. And I had a really good doctor, and she sent me to a urologist. So, I go to the urologist. She takes my history. Well, I've had prostatitis before. That could, maybe that could explain. But hey, let's take this to the next step. Let's get an MRI and and see what's going on. And she did the digital rectal exam. She didn't feel anything at all. She goes, your prostate feels fine. Get the MRI anyhow. Small lesion comes back on the MRI. So she goes, more than likely it's secondary to the prostatitis, but we really want to do a biopsy. And we'll do the biopsy in the operating room. And instead of just focusing on the lesion, why have you there? I'll take, I'll take the full panel. Comes to find out that, 20% of my prostate was full of cancer. The highest concentrations of cancer were on the side opposite of where the lesion was. So where I'm going with all this is, the annual physicals really kind of saved me, because I ended up with my Gleason was a 3.4. If I had not had regular physicals, maybe they would have found it when it was a 4.3, which is significantly different than a 3.4. Maybe they would have caught it when it was a 4.4, which would put me in stage 3. So physicals are, physicals and monitoring your health is so absolutely important. So you have to do it. You've got to be your own advocate. Now, on physical fitness, I was in the Army in 1976. I spent, a couple of years in the 82nd Airborne Division, and I can tell you that it was just different back then. And, that was the expectation, and that's who we were, and that's what we did. We ran 4 miles in combat boots in 32 minutes every day, 5 days a week. That's just who we were. So that became so ingrained in my personality. I've never walked away from that. But through my surgery and through everything else that I've been through, I've come out very well with marginal, if any, side effects. And the doctors attribute the fact that I was in very good physical shape for being 68 years old when I went in surgery. So yearly physical was, could have, in essence saved my life. Prostate cancer, if it doesn't metastasize, you have a 98% survival after 5 years. But if prostate cancer metastasizes, your survival rates go down to 30%. So
Wow.
I think the yearly physicals had a big deal. And I think being physically fit has helped me have a very minimal side effects. So I'm glad you brought it up, and I'm glad I had a chance to tell my story because I want everybody to hear it because we're all subject to it. Every one of us, just statistics alone say that 1 in 4 men will have cancer sometime in their life. And then being a firefighter, prostate cancer, you have about 30% higher incidence of prostate cancer in the firefighting population. And that's just prostate cancer. There's all these other cancers that we're exposed to. And the females, the women, they have an increased incidence of breast and cervical cancer. So it's something that affects our population as a whole. And you've got to stay on top of it. You've got to be your own advocate. Because if not, you know, it's a slow growing cancer, but nobody can tell me how slow it was going to grow. And that's why I
Right.
decided on having a very aggressive, I had the surgery. I had the robotic surgery at the Mayo Clinic, which is probably, it's an aggressive form of treatment, but I thought it was the best because nobody can tell you how slow it actually grows.
Sure. I mean, and in your case, it grew so slow you were asymptomatic. So without the physical, you have no idea. And
Totally.
then when you start having symptoms, it might be too far gone, and I mean, we just don't know at that point.
You don't know. But Chiefs need to talk about this, and Chiefs, and Chiefs not only need to talk about, but Chiefs need to go get their physicals,
Yeah.
and Chiefs need to share, you know, it's not the most comfortable thing for me to talk about, quite honestly, and the side effects and everything else that comes along with prostate cancer. It's not necessarily the most comfortable thing for me to talk about, but I feel as a chief, I have an obligation to share my story so that other people will understand the significance and they will take action to protect themselves, for them to be their own advocate. I talked about this. I was at the 90-day mark. No, was it? No, it wasn't 90 days. It was like 30 days post surgery. And I talked about this at a seminar and I got really emotional. I broke down for a minute. I had to turn my back and take a real deep breath, so I could continue. But as a chief, I feel I have an obligation to share this so that everybody else understands the significance. So going back to, the original question, yeah, I mean, chiefs have an obligation to be engaged at this to make sure we're taking care of the people in our command because we're the ones responsible for them.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's important is there's always going to be, and honestly, I think there's going to be a huge debate long past my career. I think it'll be well into when I retire. There's going to be a huge debate of is the NFPA good or bad for the fire service? And not that I want to debate that here specifically, but I think this one NFPA thing here with the 1582 and the NFPA physical of taking care of ourselves, I think it's a great thing. And I think it's putting tests on there and it's putting stuff out in the legislative and it's putting stuff in front of our faces as firefighters and as chief officers that this is important and you need to start doing this because I think, you and I can both agree long gone are the days of smoke eating, right? And I think that we get a lot of clout based on how much smoke you can eat, but that's different today. And when I first got on the job, which I mean, it was 2000. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. When I first got on the job, it was all about walking into the center of the fire and opening the bell and putting the fire out. And then as soon as the fire was out, unplugging and doing salvage and overall, trying to conserve your air. But you didn't realize at that time just exactly what you were ingesting and inhaling and absorbing through your skin. And then, Chief, I mean, how many showers or uniforms did you change right away after fires throughout your career?
Yeah.
I didn't, and so there's been a lot of good that comes out of this, and there's been a lot of good that comes from that update and mandate when it comes to our physicals. And so I'm really thankful that you were able to share that story because I think if anything from everything that you've spoken so far today, if there's anything that we need to focus on, it's take care of our health. And as I know it's cliche, but you want to get to retirement to enjoy retirement. You don't want to get to retirement to have to fight for your life. And so take the time, get your physicals, get your blood work, stay on top of your health. And because sometimes we all, including myself, need that slap in the face of you could be a lot better. And you
Oh
need
yeah.
that kick in the pants to go be a lot better.
So we had a guy that retired from our job, and he retired very young. He came on early. He met his 25 years. He was able to retire in his mid to late 40s, and within 18 months, he passed away from cancer.
Yeah.
So, and that's not the only one that I know of over the course of 5 decades. I know of a couple people in the same story, the same scenario. So absolutely. I mean, and there's some things about the NFPA that just drive me absolutely crazy. And I'll argue until the sun goes down
Yep.
about that. But being an advocate, writing the standards, having physicals, those things are just absolutely what we need to. I mean, look, when I first came on, there was one air pack and it was in a suitcase in a compartment. We'd come back from the fire full of smoke and whatever, and we'd sit on the bumper of the rig smoking cigarettes, talking about the fire for an hour before we even walked into the firehouse. So
Hmm.
things have definitely changed. We were able to get away with a lot more because the environment was a little bit different, but we certainly can't carry those old ways into today with the environment that we subject our people to. So I think that we need to be
Absolutely.
very, cognizant of that and make sure that we're setting a good example and sending the right message.
Awesome. I love it, Chief. Well, look, as we wrap up here, we have a few minutes left, but I want to give you a chance and I know you have filled our head today with so many good things, but I want to give you a chance, Chief, like as we close this out, what is your final piece of advice to the fire service? What is the thing that you want to share the most that one may motivate a chief officer to be better. It may inspire a chief officer to change some of their ways. It may inspire chief officers to institute programs or processes into their fire department that they've never thought of. Or if anything, if there's a good chief officer out there learning, it just confirms that they're doing things the right way. How do you want to close this out? What is some advice that you can give as kind of your final send off message here as we close this out?
So I truly think that, the fire service is the best job on the face of the earth. So for chiefs, I want you to realize how fortunate you are to not only be in the fire service, which is, like I said, the best job on the face of the earth. If it's not, then show me, because I've wasted five decades of my life. But as a chief, you're a leader, you're an influencer in the best job on the face of the earth. So there's a lot on your shoulders. And what are you doing to make this job, to maintain this job as the best job on the face of the earth? If you're that negative Nancy person, if you just promoted because you got tired of making EMS runs and tired of scrubbing the toilets, like what are you doing? Really? You are in an influential position in the best job on the face of the earth. So are you living up to that? Are you putting in what the fire service is giving you, which is to be part of something that's, we're what, 200 and some odd years old? I mean, even more than that. And the other thing that I will say to chiefs is, what are you doing today to make sure that your organization is better the day after you retire than it is today? Because if you really care about the fire service, if you really care about your people, you're thinking long term. You realize that you have a shelf life, you have X amount of time to spend in your position before you move on, be it another promotion, retirement, another organization. But what are you doing today to make sure that the excellence that you're striving for continues after you leave? Because if you're the only one who's really driving that train, then you're going to come up short. What are you doing to make sure that the people under your command understand that? What are you doing to develop the officers who are going to replace you when you walk out the door? And I think when you start thinking about things like that, the light bulb comes on and your focus becomes a little bit sharper. I tell officers, I say this all the time, one of my expectations for you, and what I think is an important element of your job, is to prepare your company or your battalion or whatever you're supervising to go to the worst fire you're ever going to go to when you're off. What are they going to do? Are they going to operate at the exact same, or if they're going to, are they going to operate the same level as if you were there? Because if there's a gap in performance, I think there's a gap in your leadership, because Mrs. Smith doesn't call the firehouse and say, hey, listen, I'm going to set my kitchen on fire next Tuesday. What's the vacation book look like? Oh, shit. The battalion chief and two of the captains are off. I'll just wait until Wednesday to have my fire. That doesn't happen. So if you're a chief, your responsibility is to make sure 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that your organization is delivering that level of service. So I would leave that. I would, close my conversation, with that statement to the chiefs. And what are you doing? And if you can say they, we can, then great. Whatever you're doing, maintain. And if there's a gap, no, I don't really know about that. Identify the gap and go fix it, because that's what chiefs need to do. Identify the gap and fix the gap so that 24/7 we're delivering that level of service that's going to provide the best possible outcome to the people who call 911.
I love it, man. I love it. Thank you so much, Chief. Hey, I really appreciate you coming on today. I mean, this has been like I thought it would be for me. I've gained more from it than I think that I even planned on after all the years of us talking and sharing stories together. But for all those out there that want to get a hold of you, or maybe they want to bring you out for one of your lectures, which please, y'all, you got to understand this guy helps Basil at One Bad Tour. He travels around helping with hot classes. He has his own training company. He lectures all over. So if they want to get a hold of you, Chief, how can they do it?
Well, social media, you can find First Line Fire Service Training on Facebook, First Line 850s on Instagram, and my email is dennis.firstline@gmail.
There it
So,
is.
and I'm available. I mean, I'm having conversations with one or two organizations right now. If anybody's interested, I can send you a list of the courses that I have prepared. We can do custom stuff. We can put stuff together. We can do, 2, 4, 8 hour lectures. I went to an organization last year in Kentucky. I was out there for 3 days, had a chance to speak with all three shifts. So I'm very flexible in what I can do and what I can deliver. So if you're interested, reach out. And, I'd love to have the conversation. And quite honestly, the other thing that I'll say is that when I have these conversations, I'm really interested in what your organization needs. And if I can provide that, then fine. But if I can't provide it, I'll be the first one to say that's not really up my alley. But I know people, I know all the alleys and I know all the people. So if there's something that you need that isn't a good fit for me, I'm sure I can connect you with somebody who can meet your needs.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Chief, again, I really appreciate you coming on here today. I'm so honored to have you as my second guest. This is the first podcast that I think I'll be a part of that will actually come and be something that I always wanted it to be. And that's through people like you who come on here and support me, people at Firehouse and Endeavor that support me and allowing me this opportunity to have great individuals like you and friends, friends that I get to interview and see their face and let other people around the fire service know you and your name and your message, because it's so very important that we keep this job alive and we keep it alive in the right way. So thank you very much for coming on here today. I truly appreciate you.
It's been a blast, and thank you for the opportunity. I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Absolutely. Well, you heard it here, folks. Episode 2 in the books. Chief Dennis Reilly, my main man, living in the panhandle of Florida with his toes in the sand. Can't get any better than that. As
Oh, yeah.
always, firehouse.com, Beyond the Bugles podcast. Sorry. We're coming at you next month with episode 3. Be ready because it'll be a rocker. See you next time.